You can see the shape of it on the sonar on the right.
This looks like the slide scar to me.
Bismarck is a quantum leap for the Germans, and no question. Bismarck is as capable as anything that the British have got.
A dim halo of artificial light drifted across the broken flank of the Bismarck as the drone descended, its thrusters humming against the deep Atlantic pressure. The cameras adjusted, sharpening on the ship's torn superstructure where steel ribs jutted like the bones of some ancient leviathan. The operator expected silence and stillness, the usual portrait of a wreck that had slept undisturbed for more than 8 decades. Instead, something shifted in the dark, a movement so subtle it first seemed like the drone's shadow. Then it happened again, unmistakable and deliberate, forcing everyone watching to lean closer toward their screens in disbelief. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Bismarck had long fascinated researchers, divers, and naval historians, not only because of its notorious legacy, but because of how intact many sections of the wreck remained. The cold, oxygen-poor depths of the Atlantic had preserved the battleship far better than most ships of its era. Yet for all the documented expeditions and hours of footage collected over the years, none had reported anything remotely alive inside. The interior was thought to be inaccessible to larger submersibles, too confined for manned exploration, and too structurally unstable for repeated study. The new drone mission, guided by small, flexible thrusters and equipped with advanced stabilization, was supposed to map deeper compartments no one had reached before. It wasn't designed to witness movement and certainly not to record it. The operator steadied the drone, edging it toward a half-collapsed corridor where beams angled sharply into a narrow path. Silt floated upward in lazy spirals. The vessel's hull groaned with the shifting weight of the deep ocean, but that was expected. What wasn't expected was the brief flicker of something pale retreating behind a fallen bulkhead. The camera feed showed only the shimmer of stirred sediment and a pool of darkness swallowing whatever had been there. For a while, the crew in the control room debated whether the movement was an illusion caused by the drone's lights catching loose debris. But they couldn't dismiss the instinctive sense that something had intentionally withdrawn from view. As the drone continued deeper, past rusted ladders and twisted piping, the sense of intrusion grew heavier. This was an environment untouched by light since 1941, an interior that had become its own microcosm, sealed away from the living world. To see movement within that space hinted at more than biological curiosity. It suggested that the isolation had allowed something unexpected to take root. Marine biologists monitoring the live feed noted the absence of typical deep-sea fauna. There were no fish darting through the corridors, no recognizable eels or crustaceans crawling across the metallic floors. Whatever was shifting in the dark had a silhouette that didn't conform to familiar marine life patterns. The shape was too smooth and too decisive in its retreat, as if it understood the presence of the drone and sought to avoid it. The Bismarck's interior had been largely shielded from ocean currents by its immense structural bulk. Many of its inner chambers contained stagnant water with chemical compositions different from the surrounding sea. Over decades, the metal leached minerals and created unique conditions. Scientists speculated that unusual microbial colonies, tube worms, or blind crustaceans could have adapted to this environment. But the movement recorded was too large for microbes, too coordinated for worms, and too swift for typical crustaceans. It seemed to possess awareness, judging by how it kept just beyond the reach of the drone's light. When the drone approached one of the central passageways, the cameras captured a clearer glimpse. A rounded mass glided across a doorway and vanished. It wasn't the slithering motion of a deep-sea serpent or the fluttering of an oversized fish. It moved with the quiet confidence of something comfortable navigating a labyrinth that humans had long abandoned. The engineers froze the video frame by frame, studying the contours. The shape appeared smooth, almost rubbery, with no visible scales or fins. It might have been the extremity of a much larger organism. The analysts attempted to match it with known species that inhabited extreme underwater environments, but each comparison fell short. The drone's sensors recorded slight temperature variations in the corridor, anomalies inconsistent with the surrounding cold. This suggested metabolic activity, something producing heat or interacting with the environment in unexpected ways. The uncertainty unsettled the research team. If an organism had adapted to the interior of the Bismarck, it meant the ship had evolved into its own ecological niche. Yet no one could explain how such an organism would have entered the wreck in the first place, nor how it survived in a space devoid of sunlight and scarce in nutrients. The further the drone traveled, the more audible the disturbances became. Not loud noises, but faint, rhythmic vibrations, like the brushing of something against steel. Once the drone's lights caught a collection of discarded objects drifting gently in the water. They shouldn't have been able to move without an external force. Moments later, the drone registered water displacement behind it, implying something substantial had passed through the corridor the drone had just cleared. The team watching grew tense. The drone was equipped with proximity sensors, but it lacked defensive capabilities. If whatever occupied the wreck made contact with the drone, retrieval might become impossible. The operator hesitated before moving deeper into the ship's lower decks. They were aware that pushing further could risk both the drone and the stability of the wreck's compromised interior, but curiosity, scientific responsibility, and a creeping sense of urgency compelled them forward. The unknown movement suggested that something had been developing away from human observation for decades, something that could reshape understanding of extreme marine ecosystems. The drone angled downward into a compartment partially filled with sediment. The lights scanned slowly across the room, illuminating chairs scattered in disarray and tables half sunk in debris from the ship's catastrophic final moments. Then the cameras captured something the team would replay hundreds of times: a cluster of translucent forms attached to the ceiling like strange cocoons. They pulsed faintly, their internal structures shifting in undulating waves. The drone edged closer, recording high-definition footage. The shapes resembled organic sacs, each one containing swirling patterns that hinted at internal movement. They didn't match any known species' egg sacs or growth forms. Marine specialists watching the feed commented on the structured arrangement of the sacs. They weren't scattered haphazardly. They were positioned in an almost intentional pattern along the beams of the ceiling, as though placed deliberately by something capable of selecting optimal environmental conditions. The presence of the sacs explained earlier anomalies: the warmth from metabolic processes, the shadows darting across hallways, the disturbances in sediment. Something had laid them, and whatever had done so was still inside. The operator maneuvered the drone to get a closer view of the sacs. As the drone's lights intensified on one of them, the interior mass reacted, contracting in a smooth ripple as though responding to the warmth or brightness. This sudden movement startled the team, underscoring the sensitivity of the organisms. The sacs appeared semi-gelatinous, glistening under the artificial light. The structures inside were still developing, suggesting a life cycle unlike any known marine species. The lack of oxygen, absence of natural light, and confined dimensions of the ship's corridors meant any creature thriving here had adapted in ways scientists had never encountered. The discovery triggered immediate discussions among experts. Some speculated that a deep-sea organism, previously undocumented, had found its way into the Bismarck through openings created by its violent sinking. Over time, isolated from predators and environmental fluctuations, it could have evolved rapidly, developing traits optimized for the enclosed ecosystem. Others considered the possibility of chemosynthetic organisms forming the base of a new food chain, allowing larger creatures to live within the wreck. But the movements recorded suggested an apex presence, an organism that not only survived but dominated the interior space. The team decided to withdraw the drone from the compartment with the sacs to avoid disturbing them. As the drone turned, one of the shadows appeared again, crossing swiftly at the edge of the light. This time. The movement was more assertive, following the drone for a few seconds before disappearing behind structural beams. The sense of being watched became palpable. Everyone in the control room felt the pressure of the unknown presence, as though the wreck itself had awakened. When the drone entered a broader corridor, the water clouded rapidly. The visibility dropped as silt churned from multiple directions. Something large approached, causing the drone's sensors to spike with warnings. The operator increased elevation, pulling the drone upward as the silhouette grew. The cameras caught only the outline, a smooth, elongated form sliding through the murky water with unsettling precision. It turned sharply, vanishing into a ventilation shaft that should have been far too narrow for such a large organism. That defiance of spatial limitations left the observers dumbfounded. Biologists watching the footage debated whether the creature had a highly compressible body structure, allowing it to squeeze through tight spaces. Such adaptations existed in smaller deep-sea life, but never on a scale suggested by the drone's recordings. If the organism could alter its shape or collapse its frame, it would allow it to navigate parts of the wreck inaccessible to even the smallest submersibles. As the drone retreated, the corridor behind it darkened with subtle movements. The operator noticed the organism was not the only source of motion. Smaller shapes glided behind beams, emerging briefly like flotillas of miniature shadows. These were likely the juvenile forms or subsidiary species that adapted alongside the larger organism. Their synchronized behavior suggested a complex, possibly symbiotic relationship. The drone's cameras failed to capture details, but their presence added a new layer to the mystery. The Bismarck was no longer a barren relic, it was a functioning ecosystem. The implications of this discovery extended far beyond the wreck itself. Marine scientists had long theorized that isolated environments could produce unique evolutionary outcomes, like hydrothermal vent ecosystems or sunken forests preserved in oxygen-deprived waters. But the Bismarck represented a wholly artificial structure becoming a biological cradle. The chemicals leaching from decaying steel, combined with decades of isolation, had created a pocket of conditions unlike any natural habitat. Such conditions might house organisms that diverged radically from their ancestors, evolving features tailored for survival in tight, dark compartments. Further exploration revealed additional signs of internal ecosystem development. The drone found areas where steel surfaces were coated with thick biofilm layers composed of strange, undulating textures. Some surfaces appeared etched or scraped, as though something fed on the metal or on the biofilms clinging to it. Certain corners contained clusters of organic debris woven together, resembling crude nests or anchor points. The sight of these structures stirred an unnerving realization. The inhabitants of the wreck were not simply drifting or reacting, they were shaping their environment. The drone descended into a lower compartment believed to be part of the ship's machinery section. The interior here was more intact, shielded by reinforced plating that had resisted collapse. The water felt thicker, filled with microscopic particles that danced in the beam of the lights. When the drone pushed forward, its thrusters stirred a cloud of these particles, creating a swirling fog. Amid this fog, something brushed against the drone's rear sensor. The vibration was slight but undeniable, and the operator reacted instinctively, pushing the drone forward into clearer water. What followed left the team silent. The footage captured a long, sinuous form emerging from the fog, only to withdraw swiftly as if startled by its own proximity to the drone. Its surface shimmered with a smooth, pale sheen. The absence of visible eyes or external features suggested a creature adapted entirely to darkness, relying on sensory systems beyond vision. Its retreat implied intelligence, or at least the capability to assess unfamiliar intrusions with calculated caution. Marine experts watching the feed raised an unsettling question. If the creature was intelligent enough to avoid direct contact, what else might it be capable of inside a confined steel labyrinth where it had existed undisturbed for decades? How advanced had its behavioral patterns become in isolation? And most importantly, could it pose a threat to equipment or even to future explorers? The drone continued through the machinery section, its operators determined to gather as much footage as possible before retreating. It captured more biofilms, more translucent sacs, and more glimpses of movement, always just beyond full visibility. The ship felt alive in a way that no sunken wreck should. Every turn of the drone's camera revealed spaces where the ecosystem thrived in ways that defied expectations. The deeper the drone went, the clearer it became that the Bismarck was less a tomb and more an evolutionary sanctuary. When the drone reached a chamber once used for crew operations, it found something even more extraordinary. A cluster of large organic structures hung like inverted pillars from the ceiling, connected by strands that resembled veins or tendrils. These formations pulsed rhythmically, almost as though syncing with the movements of the water. The drone recorded close-up images of the structures, revealing layers of translucent membranes with internal circulation patterns. Whatever they were not sacs but seemed to function as part of the larger organism's ecological network. The specialists observing the feed speculated that these structures might be nutrient-gathering nodes or respiratory chambers adapted for extracting chemical elements from water trapped within the wreck. This meant the ecosystem inside the Bismarck wasn't relying solely on external influences. It was self-regulating, generating and recycling resources as needed. Such a closed-loop system suggested an organism or group of organisms of astonishing biological sophistication. As the drone maneuvered close to one of the membrane structures, the chamber trembled very slightly. A subtle current passed through the water, displacing small debris. Something massive stirred in the opposite corner, hidden by crumpled beams and fallen walls. The drone's operator hesitated, choosing not to approach further. The team understood that they were on the edge of provoking a response from something they didn't yet understand. The organism, or whatever entity controlled this ecosystem, had clearly sensed the drone's presence. It was observing. The implications of this discovery rippled far beyond marine biology. The existence of such an ecosystem inside a man-made structure challenged assumptions about evolution, survival patterns, and biological adaptation. The Bismarck had inadvertently become a crucible for life forms that might represent previously unknown branches of marine development. The stability and isolation of the wreck had allowed them to thrive without disturbance, meaning scientists now had a rare opportunity to study an entirely unique biosphere. Yet the discovery also posed pressing concerns. If the organisms inside the wreck were sensitive to environmental changes, the introduction of light, sound, or foreign chemical compounds from exploration devices might disrupt the ecosystem. The ethical implications of interfering with such a perfectly isolated environment weighed heavily on the researchers. There were debates on whether future expeditions should even attempt to collect samples, or whether they should allow the ecosystem to remain undisturbed. The drone began its ascent toward the upper corridors, its mission nearing completion. As it moved, the cameras caught one final unsettling image: several smaller organisms moving in coordinated patterns along the walls, almost as though escorting the drone out of the deeper compartments. Their behavior was consistent with territorial monitoring or protective guidance, suggesting a level of environmental ownership that disturbed everyone who witnessed it. The larger organism remained unseen during the ascent, but its presence was palpable through subtle currents and shifting shadows. When the drone finally exited the Bismarck and ascended toward the surface, the research team sat in silence. They had not only discovered life where none was expected, they had uncovered an entire hidden world. The realization that a warship sunk decades ago now harbored a thriving, mysterious ecosystem struck them with a mix of wonder and unease. The Bismarck had transformed from a relic of destruction into a sanctuary of unknown biological marvels. The findings forced experts to reconsider long-held assumptions about life in extreme environments. The ocean's depths had always hidden secrets, but this one felt different. It had formed within human history, inside one of the most infamous ships ever built. The wreck had become a vessel not just of historical memory, but of biological innovation, a place where evolution had written a new chapter in silence and darkness. As researchers began analyzing the footage and discussing next steps, the underlying question lingered heavily. What else might be evolving within the forgotten corners of the deep, far from human observation? The discovery within the Bismarck was a reminder of how little was truly known about the ocean's capacity for transformation. The movements recorded inside the wreck were more than a scientific revelation. They were a testament to nature's ability to reclaim, adapt, and thrive in places once marked by devastation. And deep beneath the Atlantic, the Bismarck still rested in darkness, its compartments pulsing with the quiet rhythms of an ecosystem that had no name, no classification, and no equal. The drone's recovery marked the end of its mission, but what it brought back to the surface ignited a level of scientific debate that spread far beyond the confines of the research vessel. The teams reviewing the footage realized they were dealing with more than an unusual marine species. They were confronting an ecosystem that hinted at the possibility of rapid adaptation, alternative evolutionary pathways, and perhaps even a form of environmental intelligence shaped by isolation. With every frame re-examined, every anomaly cataloged, the broader implications grew more unsettling. The footage of the translucent sacs sparked immediate interest from biochemists. Early visual analysis pointed toward structures far more complex than simple egg casings or cocoons. Some researchers proposed that the sacs might serve multiple purposes: development chambers, nutrient reservoirs, or even environmental regulators, maintaining conditions favorable for growth. The rhythmic pulsing indicated an active process at work. If the sacs were part of a larger biological system, they might represent an unprecedented form of communal or hive-like functioning. The fact that they reacted to the drone's lights suggested a sensitivity to external stimuli, indicating that even small changes within the wreck's environment could have significant consequences. While biological debates continued, marine engineers focused on the structural presence of the ecosystem, piecing together how the Bismarck's architecture may have influenced the creature's adaptations. The ship's tightly sealed compartments, narrow access points, and multiple layers of steel created a labyrinth unlike anything in nature. These unusual conditions shaped the environmental pressures that drove whatever lived inside to evolve in unexpected ways. Without currents, predators, or large food sources, survival likely depended on efficiency, stealth, and resource recycling. The organisms might have learned to navigate using a form of vibration sensing, responding to metal reverberations, water shifts, or temperature changes. This would explain their ability to detect the drone long before visual contact was possible. As the scientific community debated theories, the most intriguing conversations centered around how long the ecosystem had been developing. The Bismarck sank in 1941. That meant more than 80 years of uninterrupted isolation. Evolutionary biologists speculated that organisms trapped inside might have undergone accelerated evolutionary shifts triggered by environmental extremity. Some even suggested that the creatures could be descendants of small, soft-bodied species swept into the wreck during its initial sinking, species that later diverged dramatically once exposed to an entirely enclosed habitat dominated by decaying steel and stagnant water. The possibilities were endless and increasingly difficult to categorize within known marine paradigms. As experts combed through the video feed, attention also shifted to the creature's behavior. Its avoidance of the drone was deliberate, not merely instinctual. It did not flee blindly. Instead, it moved with clear spatial awareness, retreating only far enough to remain outside the drone's reach while still tracking its progress. Behavioral ecologists studying the movement patterns noted that the creature appeared to monitor from multiple vantage points. It was as if it was familiar with every corridor, every obstruction, every angle of approach. This level of environmental mastery suggested long-term occupancy and perhaps a complex understanding of the wreck's geography. One particularly striking moment in the footage showed the creature compressing its body to pass through a narrow ventilation shaft. This ability captivated biophysicists. For a large organism to alter its form so dramatically required a skeletal structure, if it had one at all, far different from vertebrates known to science. It might possess a distributed internal framework, something flexible yet supportive, allowing extreme compression without damage. If the creature lacked rigid structures altogether, relying instead on a muscular hydrostatic system, it could account for its remarkable fluidity of movement. The potential biological mechanisms hinted at discoveries that could reshape knowledge of marine physiology. The cluster of smaller organisms following the drone during its ascent sparked equal fascination and concern. Their coordinated movement implied social or hierarchical behavior within the ecosystem. They did not swarm randomly, they moved with rhythm and spacing, as though responding to signals from each other or from the larger organism. If the ecosystem inside the Bismarck developed social structures, even rudimentary ones, it pointed to a highly adaptive environment where cooperation offered survival advantages. Whether this cooperation was instinctual, chemical, or communicative remained an open question, but it signaled complexity more often associated with species far more evolutionarily established. The unexpected presence of biofilm networks inside the ship prompted interest from microbiologists. The textures and patterns shown in the footage differed from typical deep-sea microbial mats. Some areas showed layered growth that resembled fungoid structures despite being underwater. Others had fibrous threads stretching between surfaces, possibly acting as nutrient channels. If the organisms within the wreck used these networks to process minerals from the metal or to nourish their developing sacs, the ecosystem had effectively created its own nutrient cycle. This meant it wasn't simply surviving, it was thriving in a closed loop, capable of sustaining multiple generations over decades. Meanwhile, naval historians found themselves drawn unexpectedly into the scientific discussion. They examined blueprints of the Bismarck, assessing how flooding patterns, explosion damage, and collapse zones might have influenced the ecosystem's development. They identified compartments most likely to remain watertight after the sinking, areas where temperature and chemical conditions remained stable enough to foster biological growth. Their findings suggested that specific sections of the wreck had become natural incubators, insulated from external disruptions for decades. Ironically, the very durability that made the Bismarck one of the most formidable battleships of its time now allowed it to serve as a cradle for new life. As more experts weighed in, the implications grew deeper still. The discovery raised uncomfortable questions about other wrecks scattered across the ocean floor. Thousands of ships, submarines, and aircraft lie sunken around the world, many of them sealed for decades or even centuries. If the right combination of conditions existed, limited currents, stable temperatures, and accessible mineral sources, it was possible that other wrecks hosted ecosystems no one had imagined. The Bismarck might be the first discovered, but it was unlikely the only one. The team responsible for the drone mission faced mounting pressure to plan a follow-up expedition. Governments, scientific organizations, and private institutions all wanted involvement. Some advocated for retrieving samples to study the organisms directly. Others argued vehemently against disturbing the ecosystem, warning that physical intrusion could destabilize or even destroy something that had survived untouched for decades. Debates arose over whether even capturing more detailed footage could inadvertently alter the creature's behavior or damage their environment. Despite these controversies, preparations for a second mission began quietly. Engineers proposed designing a more advanced drone capable of navigating tighter spaces, collecting environmental readings, and recording higher-resolution imagery. Unlike the first drone, which relied primarily on lights and cameras, the new model would carry chemical sensors, vibration detectors, and mapping instruments. These tools would allow researchers to analyze the wreck's internal environment without requiring direct contact with the organisms. But these technological advancements did little to calm ethical debates. Many researchers worried that even indirect measurement might disrupt the ecosystem. The Bismarck's isolation was part of what made its inhabitants unique. Introducing modern technology, even carefully, could alter chemical balances, disturb sediment, or create vibrations that the creatures might perceive as intrusive. Some feared that any further exploration risked prompting defensive behavior from the organisms, especially the larger one whose shadow lingered through the footage with an almost watchful presence. The footage of the membrane structures hanging from the chamber ceilings became a focal point for theorists exploring the concept of emergent ecosystems within artificial environments. These researchers argued that the Bismarck represented a rare case where human-made structures unintentionally provided the conditions necessary for life to adapt, expand, and evolve in isolation. The membranes appeared to function as organs within the ecosystem, support structures facilitating chemical exchange or reproduction. If the larger organism played a central regulatory role, it might function as an ecological anchor, shaping the environment to sustain subordinate species. This hinted at a hierarchy within the biological community that paralleled natural symbiotic systems, but within an entirely artificial habitat. Some scientists proposed radical ideas that the ecosystem's development might reveal how life could adapt on other worlds. If organisms on Earth could establish themselves in sealed, metallic, resource-limited environments, it opened new possibilities for understanding how life might emerge or evolve in extraterrestrial settings, such as derelict machinery, subsurface caverns, or sealed-off alien structures. The Bismarck became a model not just for marine biology, but for astrobiology, prompting speculation about life's resilience under extreme constraint. As the research intensified, an interdisciplinary effort formed, uniting experts across fields. Biologists, engineers, geologists, historians, and physicists collaborated to form a comprehensive framework for studying the Bismarck ecosystem without causing harm. They analyzed pressure data from the depth where the wreck lay, noting how extreme conditions affected both the drone and potential organisms. They studied the chemical interactions between seawater and decaying steel, theorizing how these reactions might create energy sources for chemosynthetic lifeforms. They even considered the influence of WWT-era materials, fuel residues, paints, oils that could have contributed to the biochemical evolution inside the wreck. Meanwhile, the drone's footage underwent enhancement using modern imaging algorithms. Once static shadows now revealed subtle textures and outlines previously overlooked. One enhanced frame showed faint ridges along the creature's body, patterns that could be sensory organs or muscular divisions. Another frame revealed what might be a secondary appendage, used perhaps for propulsion or manipulation. The deeper analysts looked, the more the creature's biological sophistication became apparent. It was no amorphous anomaly. It was something intricately adapted to its environment. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on what the drone found and what will happen next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.